My name is Casey. I'm one of the founders of Hacker Paradise. You might have seen me before in Eugene's documentary with a really weird 90s haircut. I'm here today to talk to you a bit about my story, success, failure, and I really want to talk about serendipity and community and how they've affected my life over the last few years. But first, a bit about my background. I'm from the United States. I grew up outside New York in a small town. And I got the travel bug really early. When I was 17, I left the States, and I went and spent a year in Japan as an exchange student. It's the first time I really left the country for an extended period, and I was thrown into a Japanese high school, living with a Japanese host family, spoke no Japanese, but within a couple months I could hold a conversation, I could meet people in a bar, at a sushi restaurant, and I really got this taste for adventure. I was constantly learning new things, constantly meeting new people, and it was great. So when I went back to the States, I went back to school, I quickly became involved in startups. For me, startups has a lot of the same allure as travel. There's always adventure, there's excitement, there's uncertainty. You've got to constantly be learning and growing. And it gave me a lot of stimulation and exhilaration while I was still at school. When I started doing my own projects and I started getting involved with other startups. And when I was 21, a friend of mine floated the idea about trying to start a business in Japan. And I'd been in Japan for a year, I had some connections over there, and for me it seemed like the best of both worlds, being able to travel and start a company. So we looked at about 15 different industries, from everything from shoes to dating to healthcare, and we ended up deciding to build a company around home decor e-commerce. We thought it was the next big thing, it was going to be huge. So we went on 99 Designs, got a logo, we picked a name, got a domain name, and we made Chateau Bleu. It was the first company either of us had really ever started. And we did a lot of things wrong. One of them was we didn't really research the domain name before we bought it. And about a month after we got it, I had a Japanese friend tell me that when you Googled Chateau Bleu in Japanese, it was a bunch of escort services in Tokyo. So we quickly had to deal with that. But over time, during this year, being the first company I'd really worked on, my identity became really invested in what I was working on. I love telling people I was an entrepreneur, I was in Japan, I was working on this thing. And that was great for a while until things started going downhill. One of the first-time entrepreneur mistakes we made was we didn't talk to customers for the first 7 months. And we just built this website, built out a product mix, and we had no idea what people actually wanted. At the time, I was living in this tiny apartment in Japan with a bed and just enough room for a little carpet. And I was trying to sell furniture to Japanese housewives. Needless to say, I didn't really understand the market, and I also had really no interest in the market. I started working really crazy hours, becoming really consumed by the drive for success, and becoming really unhappy. I'd gone to Japan, I wanted to travel to have this really full lifestyle. And here I was, not socializing, I was working really odd hours. I'd stopped eating healthy, I'd stopped exercising because all I cared about was success, and that was the only thing I was focused on. So eventually I started making some healthier choices, eating healthy and all that, but still the fact that I had no interest in home decor was really eating at me. I was thinking, if I wanted to spend 2 or 3 years working on a company so I could find some success down the line, I might as well just become a banker, And if there are bankers here, I'm sorry. But yeah, I did not want to do that. So I talked to my partner about some of these doubts, and we ultimately decided to shut down the company. And I went back to the US, feeling like an utter failure. People would come and talk to me, and they would say, oh, it's so cool, at 21 you left school and you tried to start a business in Japan. But all I could think was, I worked on this company for a year, and we didn't sell a single product. We didn't even launch. And I just felt like an utter, kind of like an imposter. I tried, my identity was still really involved in the products I was working on. My self-worth was really still invested in it. So I kept trying to figure out how I could be successful. I had these business ideas, which I could never start because I had so much pressure, self-induced pressure to be successful. And I heard this metaphor at the time, which I really like, which is if you take a 1 meter wide board that's 20 meters long, and you put it on the ground and you tell someone to walk across it, it's really easy. You can just, it's no big deal. But if you take that the same board and you raise it up 50 stories in between 2 buildings and you ask someone to walk across it, it's a huge deal. It's scary. There's this fear of death. And essentially what I was doing at the time was I was psychologically making this board that was on the ground, trying out, experimenting with business ideas, trying different things. I was taking that psychologically and putting it 50 stories high because I was so afraid to make a mistake. I was so afraid to feel the visceral effects of failure yet again. So I really didn't do anything for a while. And some of the other side effects of having this kind of being consumed with success are that I had a tough time relaxing. Anytime I wasn't working, I felt was time wasted. I felt like I should be doing something better. Because much like the video that started out this day, I thought that success was about drive. It was about perseverance. It was about waking up at 6 a.m. while everyone else was asleep and doing what they couldn't want to do. But really, all that resulted in for me was just being utterly miserable. And I also really had a tough time actually enjoying anything I did. My sole reason for trying out business ideas or for getting back into programming was that I wanted to create a company. And so there was no intrinsic joy in what I was working on. It was just a really miserable time. But luckily, at the time, I took a trip with my dad to Costa Rica. And I was down there, and I was abroad for the first time in a while. And I realized that I didn't want to just spend the next couple of years trying to figure out a business, trying to figure out what the next path is on the way to success. And I definitely didn't want to get involved with another startup where I'd start working 80 hours a week, and I'd stop eating healthy, and I'd kind of let myself go, when all I really wanted to do when I was a kid was just travel and see the world and be healthy. So while I was there, I realized that I was going to what I really wanted to do is spend some time traveling. And being a semi-broke college student, I had to figure out a way to do that cheaply. So what I did, I knew about this website called helpx.net. I'd found this when I was maybe 19. I was interested in traveling, and I was trying to figure out ways to do it cheap. And basically what HelpX is a website that facilitates bartering with hotels. So it's mostly ways where you can barter work as a receptionist or in a hotel bar in exchange for room and board. I wasn't really interested in that, but I had the skills as a developer, and I had some marketing skills. And so I sent out emails to maybe 10 hotels. I'm like, hey, I want to come work for you. I can do web development. I can do marketing. Your website's shit. Let me try and fix it. And luckily, 4 got back to me, and 1 was really interesting. It was a hotel in Costa Rica, and they, like many hotels in Costa Rica, were utterly empty in the off-season. There's a rainy season from about July through December, and it's just, it's a wasteland. There's no one there. So they're trying to create these yoga retreats. So I came on board, I put together a landing page for them, started talking to some yoga instructors to try and bring them down, and then the yoga instructor who was leading the charge had her laptop stolen and decided to flee back to the UK. And so here was this project I was working on. I was going to be spending the next couple months on it, and I was super excited. I'm kind of I'm into meditation. I've been doing a little yoga. This seemed like a really good fit. And then it just went out the window. And the hotel owner said, hey, you can still come down for a week or 2. You've been working for us, but we don't really have much for you to do, so you should probably find another place to go. And at the time, I was at kind of a decision point. I was really excited to go traveling again, and to spend some time without this kind of drive for success, to give myself the freedom to work on projects just because I wanted to work on them, not because they were going to get me somewhere in life or in career, get me prestige, get me money. But the one thing I was disappointed about was leaving behind my community back home. I'd spent some time in Philadelphia, New York, and Tokyo's got quite a nice tech community, and I knew that when I wanted to be working on my own projects, and to really, being around other people is a great way to get inspiration and to maintain forward momentum. So I pitched the hotel owner on bringing a bunch of programmers down to his hotel for 3 months as a way to travel and have a little pop-up tech community. And so he facing 0% occupancy for the next 3 months, he was like, sure, give it a try. So I put up this landing page. Hacker Paradise started as a 12-week programming retreat in Costa Rica. Crazily enough, people started applying. And at this point, I'm like, holy crap, this is a real thing. I need to find someone else to help me work on it. I'm a self-taught developer. There's people who are applying who've worked at Google. I'm out of my league. So I started talking to a number of people, friends of friends, trying to bring them on board to work with me, and nothing was really panning out. But little did I know, there was a guy who had gone to the same university as me, who graduated a few years before, who was having some visa troubles in the US. This is my future business partner, well, he's my business partner now, at his deportation party. Yeah. So if you're unfamiliar with the US visa system, even if you're fully qualified for a job, it's a lottery. So even if you're fully qualified, you have a company that's willing to sponsor you, there's only a 30 or 40% chance that you're actually going to get the visa. Luckily for me, he had not gotten his last visa, and he was basically forced to spend a year working and traveling. We had a couple Skype calls, he ended up coming on board, and we threw together our first trip in Costa Rica. Maybe we had 20 or 30 people there, and it was rough. So to give you an idea, this was on the surface, this hotel was great. It was very picturesque. It was near one of those beautiful beaches that no one knew about in Costa Rica. But, it was Costa Rica. So there were the showers had these electric water heaters that were on the top of the nozzle, which you'd sometimes get hot water, but if you got too close to it when the shower was on, you'd get electrocuted. That's just how the mechanism worked. There were ants everywhere. Someone's room got flooded on the first night. And really, the worst thing, actually, was that we didn't think about this in the beginning, but we got there, and 2 or 3 days later, we realized that none of the outlets were grounded. And this is Costa Rica in the rainy season where, every other night there's just like hours and hours of intense thunderstorms. So we lost 2 routers before we realized this was a thing and brought an electrician to actually, get the place going. But it was a great experience. And since then, we've thrown a number of trips. We've been in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Bali, Thailand, in Costa Rica in the first part. Now we're in Europe. We were just in Estonia, Barcelona. We're coming here to Berlin this month. And in the fall, we're going to Tokyo and Tokyo and Taiwan. And we've had 120 people come through the program. And for me, this is really amazing because I had no intention of creating this. And when I first started out on this journey, I was thinking I was going to bum around Costa Rica, maybe Panama for a couple months. Then I might go to Japan, where I had a friend who had like an English school, and maybe do some consulting for him, and come back to the States and like get a real job or try and start a company in tech. And looking back, it's been a story of serendipity. I had no idea what this was going to happen. And if I'd stuck to my plan, I definitely wouldn't be here. I'd probably be back in the States right now wondering whether I should still be traveling. And this all resulted from the initial decision to say, okay, maybe I don't need to figure out every step on the path to success. It resulted from me, putting myself out there and emailing these hotels where I didn't really know whether it would work. And ultimately, it came from just a lot of luck. If that yoga instructor hadn't had her laptop stolen, I might just be, on the same typical path. I might be running a yoga retreat in Costa Rica right now instead of, on the stage here at DNX. And that's really cool. And so I was talking about serendipity with a friend here yesterday, and she said something along the lines of, serendipity is great, it's an awesome little buzzword, but when you're not feeling success, it feels like, what can I do? If success just happens, then what can I do? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about ways as a nomad you can kind of cultivate serendipity. The first thing I think that's important is location. So if you're getting started as a nomad just now, I highly recommend starting in a nomad hub like Chiang Mai, Ho Chi Minh City. Bali is great. I hear Medellin is up and coming. Going to these types of places, you'll meet other like-minded people. They might become collaborators. They might become potential business partners. But best of all, they'll probably become friends. And it deals with some of what Mark was talking about before, some of the loneliness on the road. Because in some of these places, you can find people doing what you want, or doing things like you. And you never know who you'll meet. So there's a cool story of, there's a guy in the audience, Jay, who's working on a company called Moodoo. And he'd been trying to get PR for his startup for months. He'd been cold emailing people, nothing was happening. And then one day at a party in Bali, he met a writer for entrepreneur.com who fast-tracked the article, got it published, and it's driven most of the traffic to his site, which is super cool. And how random is that? Running into an American journalist at a party in Bali that ends up becoming a thing. So the next part I think about cultivating serendipity is community. There was a time, in between our first and second batch. Our first batch was in Costa Rica. Our second batch was in Southeast Asia. It wasn't entirely clear that I was going to have enough personal runway to get to Southeast Asia. I'd been doing some freelance work on the side before, but I started just spending all my time in Hacker Paradise, and it was really, it would have been close. But I had a conversation with a bunch of people. Random conversation over lunch one day turned into a side project, which ended up giving me 6 months of extra revenue to cover that. And those kinds of things happen in New York. They happen in San Francisco. These random ideas, they happen in a lot of places. They happen less in places for me at least, when I was traveling through Cebu in December or Tokyo in January, there aren't that many nomads. And I spent a lot more time in my hotel room than I did out talking to people. And serendipity is less likely to strike when you're not meeting people. The last thing I want to say about community is that I think we need more of it in the nomad community. So this conference is fantastic. I'm so excited to see so many people here. Marcus and Feli have done an amazing job putting this together. But there's still places if you go, like Cebu and Tokyo, where you might be the only nomad. And that's part of why we have Hacker Paradise. We want to open up more locations to nomads. So you can go to Da Nang, Vietnam, which is this kind of off the beaten path, awesome beach location, but there's no expats there, there's no nomads there. We want to open that up to nomads because we can bring 30 people. But there's also the other awesome initiatives coming up in this space. So there's the cruise to Brazil coming up later this fall. I think they've got 100 nomads or more, taking the trip from Europe to Brazil. DNX camps, places all over the world. There's CoHub and the CoBoat coming up in Thailand. These are all sorts of awesome initiatives. And if you haven't yet been on one of these trips, I highly recommend thinking about it, because you meet awesome people, there's possible impact for your business, but more than that, you make lifelong friends. Even here in Berlin, I've ended up living in a 4-bedroom apartment with 10 people right now for this conference, which is just fantastic. Yeah, okay, that's our people. It's great. You know, we were up until like 3 a.m. yesterday talking, which is probably bad because we had to be here at 9 and I had to speak. But it was a lot of fun, and it's been a lot of fun since we got here. And so I would encourage you all, if you're in a nomad location that doesn't have community, or if you're just traveling and you wish you had more people around, to think about organizing something. You know, I've met some of the most amazing people in my life in the last year, and I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't been organizing this community. Yeah, I wanted to have something like super philosophical and esoteric to end with, but what I will end with is this. If you are thinking about starting a community, reach out to me. Always happy to help. We've talked to a bunch of people here, happy to share experience about the craziness of finding 30 affordable hotel rooms in Tokyo or any of the other craziness, managing conflict within a community. So reach out to me on that. And for everyone else, I hope you have a great rest of the conference and safe travels. Thanks.